There comes a moment in every life when the music stops, the laughter fades, and the silence becomes deafening. A moment when everything you believed about how life should work collapses under the weight of one phone call, one diagnosis, one betrayal, one heartbreak. We don't prepare for these moments. They simply arrive, uninvited, unexpected, and unbearable. And in that moment, when life breaks you, the question isn't just, why did this happen? It becomes far more personal. Where is God now? Is He still good? Is He still near? These are not the questions of the faithless. They are the cries of those who have loved deeply, trusted fully, and now find themselves shattered by the sharp edges of life. It's in these moments that cheap answers fall apart. Religious cliches fade like mist, and what remains is a soul standing before eternity asking, what is God really doing when everything is falling apart? Today we are not here to ignore the pain. We're not here to pretend that faith means always smiling. We're here to uncover a deeper truth, that the God who allows us to be broken does not abandon us in our brokenness. In fact, it may be where He meets us most profoundly. When life breaks you, one of the most difficult thoughts to battle is the idea that God has abandoned you. The silence of heaven can feel heavier than the weight of the trial itself. It's easy to associate pain with divine distance. The human heart, in its fragile state, begins to wonder if the absence of comfort means the absence of God. Yet, the scriptural witness and the story of many lives tell us otherwise. Brokenness is not abandonment. It is often a space where God chooses to meet us most deeply, not in the noise of celebration, but in the silence of suffering. Throughout history, some of the most profound encounters with God happened not on mountain peaks, but in the valley of the shadow. Elijah heard God not in the fire, wind, or earthquake, but in the still, small voice. Job sat in ashes and silence when he finally met the reality of God beyond theology. Pain does not always bring answers, but it invites an awareness, a raw awareness of our helplessness, our humanity, and our hunger for meaning. It strips us of illusions, reveals our need, and opens our ears. The spiritual paradox is this: we often see more clearly in the darkness than in the light. God's presence is not proven by the absence of suffering. If that were the case, Christ would never have hung on the cross. But it is there, at the center of human agony, that God made Himself most known. To assume that brokenness equals divine abandonment is to misunderstand the very nature of the God who chose to suffer with us and for us. The silence of God is not His indifference. Sometimes it is His way of drawing us inward, away from noise, so that we can hear the deeper voice within. When the heart is broken, its walls are thinner and grace flows in more freely. In the Psalms, David cried out from the caves, not the palaces. His most honest worship came when his world had collapsed. God did not speak every time, but He was there, present, watchful, shaping. We live in a culture that idolizes strength and despises weakness. But in the economy of the Spirit, brokenness is sacred ground. It is not a detour, it is often the doorway. We mistake silence for absence, forgetting that the teacher is always silent during the test. But the test is not the absence of the teacher. It is the demonstration of what has been taught. God is not watching from a distance when we're broken. He is working in the shadows. What appears to be a moment of divine retreat is often the setup for divine revelation. We may not see it now. We may not feel it, but He is not absent. He is near to the brokenhearted. He binds up their wounds not from a distance, but with His own hands. Brokenness is not the end. It is where deeper intimacy begins. In the fires of suffering, something deeper than comfort is often being forged. Character, the human soul, like precious metal, is rarely purified without heat. When we suffer, we are not merely enduring random pain, but often undergoing a process that tests, reveals, and reshapes us. God, in His infinite wisdom, does not delight in pain, but neither does He waste it. It becomes the crucible in which He refines our hearts, not to harm us, but to burn away the illusions we have about strength, control, and self-sufficiency. What emerges, if we allow the process to unfold, is not a broken spirit, but a humbled one. Not a crushed life, but a clarified soul. Through suffering, the soul confronts what it truly believes. When all comforts are stripped away, when success fades and relationships falter, we are faced with ourselves, and more importantly, with the God who remains. This moment of confrontation is not God's judgment, but His invitation. He calls us not to escape suffering, but to walk through it with Him. In doing so, we begin to understand a strange but powerful truth. What hurts us can also heal us when placed in the hands of God. There is a certain arrogance that suffering exposes, the belief that we are the authors of our own peace. Pain interrupts that illusion. It arrests us, humbles us, and makes us receptive to truths we ignored in times of ease. Through trials, we learn patience. We learn to trust not in outcomes, but in the one who holds them. We learn endurance, not as a duty, but as a discipline that deepens our capacity to love, forgive, and persevere. God is not interested in superficial faith. He is interested in the kind of faith that has been tested and still stands. That kind of faith cannot be taught in comfort. It is born in pressure. Suffering reveals what is false and strengthens what is true. It teaches us to lean not on our own understanding, but to acknowledge God in ways we never would have if everything had gone according to our plans. It shows us that maturity is not just about how much we know, but how deeply we can trust when nothing makes sense. In refining us, God is not making us less human. He is making us more whole. He is carving into our hearts the image of His Son, who Himself was made perfect through suffering. That is not an abstract idea. It is a lived reality. And when we realize that the pain we feel is not outside of God's purpose, it transforms how we carry it. What was once unbearable becomes sacred. What once broke us becomes what shapes us. The fire doesn't just consume, it reveals the gold. That is the refining work of God, not to destroy us, but to make us radiant with the strength that can only come from having passed through the flames with Him beside us. Pain has a peculiar way of blinding us to purpose in the moment. When we are in the midst of suffering, clarity often escapes us. We look for reasons, but they seem hidden behind a veil of silence. The questions that rise within us are honest, raw, and sometimes desperate. Why this? Why now? Why me? And yet, in the unfolding of time, many come to see that there was something being written beneath the surface. Purpose, though invisible in the present, was never absent. It was simply hidden, waiting for the moment when understanding could bloom from reflection. God does not always explain Himself in real time, because faith is not built on explanation, it is built on trust. If every answer were given in the moment of our pain, there would be no need to lean on Him. But in withholding immediate clarity, God invites us into relationship, not transaction. He asks us to walk even when we cannot see, knowing that His silence does not mean indifference but intention. The tapestry of life is woven on both sides. On one side, the knots and tangles confuse us. On the other side, a pattern is emerging. But we are often only allowed to see the underside while we live through the pain. Only in hindsight, sometimes years later, do we look back and realize that the very seasons we resented were the ones that shaped the deepest parts of who we are. God hides purpose in pain because purpose must be discovered, not dictated. If it were laid out plainly, it would not grow us. It would merely inform us. But when purpose is found after walking through darkness, it strengthens us. It transforms knowledge into wisdom and experience into compassion. We begin to live not with answers, but with deeper awareness of what really matters. In our broken moments, we often pray for God to change the situation, but sometimes He is using the situation to change us. We ask for escape, He provides endurance. We plead for comfort, He offers character. And it is only after the storm passes that we begin to see what was being built inside us all along. The pain we felt was not wasted. It was doing a work too deep for words. Just as seeds must be buried in darkness to grow, so must certain truths be born out of sorrow. When we emerge, we are not the same people. We are not untouched, but we are deeper, more aware, more alive. And though we may not welcome the pain again, we would not trade what it gave us. The hidden purpose becomes visible not because God was distant, but because He was designing something far greater than we could have asked for. Pain becomes sacred when it opens our eyes to the deeper narrative of God, one in which every tear mattered, every silence had weight, and every wound had a future. There are moments in life when we face circumstances so painful, so disorienting, that we begin to question the very character of God. Why would a loving God allow what seems to contradict love itself? Why would He not intervene when the heart is shattering, when the innocent suffer, when life seems to unravel without warning? These are not shallow questions. They are born out of real wounds. And yet, within the depth of that anguish lies a mysterious but vital truth. Sometimes God allows what He hates in order to accomplish what He loves. This is not a justification of evil, nor a denial of the pain we feel, but a recognition that divine love is far more concerned with eternity than with temporary ease. God sees the end from the beginning, while we are often imprisoned by the present moment. We ask for relief, but He works for redemption. We cry for rescue, but He prepares us for something greater than comfort, transformation. When God allows suffering, it is never casual, never careless. It is always purposeful, even when that purpose is hidden from us. We are not abandoned in our pain. We are being drawn into a process, a refining, a reshaping, a redirection of the soul. Think of the surgeon who cuts not to harm but to heal. The pain inflicted is real, but it is not malicious. It is necessary. In the same way, God may allow the loss of what we once depended on so that we might lean into what truly sustains. He may permit a season of darkness so that we might finally see the light that never changes. What He hates, pride, selfishness, superficial faith, is often only confronted when life breaks us open. And in that breaking, the love of God does not disappear, it intensifies. Because He is not content with leaving us as we are. He desires more for us than mere survival. He desires wholeness, holiness, eternity. Even in the death of Jesus, we see this truth most clearly. God the Father allowed what was most painful, the suffering of His own Son, not because He delighted in it, but because through it He accomplished what He loved, the salvation of mankind. The greatest good came through the greatest sorrow. And that pattern echoes in the lives of those who walk with Him. What God allows is never for destruction, but for deeper redemption. What He permits is always tied to what He plans. His hands may seem hidden, but they are never idle. He is shaping eternity in the silence of suffering. When we trust that, even through tears, we find peace, not because the pain is gone, but because we begin to see a glimpse of its purpose in allowing what seems unbearable God is often removing what is unworthy and planting what will last. The pain is temporary, but the work it does in us echoes into forever. To understand what God is doing when life breaks us, we must look beyond our personal suffering and fix our eyes on the cross. The cross stands as the greatest paradox in all of history, where unimaginable pain met unimaginable love. It is through this singular moment that all human suffering finds both a mirror and a meaning. Jesus did not simply die a tragic death. He bore the weight of sin, shame, and suffering so that no human pain would be outside his reach. The cross is not merely an event to remember. It is the lens through which we interpret every tear, every ache, every unanswered prayer. When we see suffering through the eyes of the cross, we realize that God is not distant from our pain. He is intimately acquainted with it. He chose to enter into it not as an observer, but as a participant. No other faith dares to proclaim a God who suffered. But in Christianity, we meet a God who bled, who cried out, who felt the betrayal of friends, the silence of heaven, and the agony of injustice. This is not weakness, it is love in its rawest form. And when we suffer, we do not suffer alone. We follow a path he has already walked. The cross also reminds us that the worst moment is never the final moment. On Good Friday, it looked as though evil had won. The sky grew dark, the earth trembled, and hope seemed lost. But 3 days later, what was thought to be the end became the beginning of redemption. That is the rhythm of God's grace. Pain, then purpose, death, then resurrection, silence, then song. This is not poetic language. It is a deep truth for anyone who has cried in the night and waited for the morning. The resurrection assures us that suffering never has the final word. When viewed through the cross, our suffering is not senseless. It may remain mysterious, but it is never meaningless. It becomes part of a larger story being written by hands that still bear the scars of love. We often want answers, but the cross gives us something more powerful: presence. The presence of a Savior who knows, who understands, who walks with us through the valley and never lets go. That changes how we suffer. It does not remove the pain, but it redeems it. It transforms the narrative. It teaches us to hope, not in the absence of pain, but in the presence of Christ within it. The cross invites us to trust, even when we cannot trace the reason. Because if God could take the worst injustice in history and turn it into the greatest act of love, then he can take our darkest nights and bring forth light we never expected. The cross is the proof that love and suffering are not enemies, but companions on the journey toward redemption. In the story God writes over every human life, brokenness is never meant to be the last chapter. Though we may feel as though suffering has the final word, the truth is that restoration is always what God is moving toward. Pain may be the present reality, but redemption is the divine promise. In the middle of our deepest wounds, we often cannot imagine healing. The weight of sorrow can make us forget that God is not finished with us. But Scripture consistently paints a picture of a God who rebuilds what has been torn down, who gathers what has been scattered, and who breathes new life into what seems dead. Throughout the pages of both Old and New Testaments, we see people brought to the end of themselves. Joseph betrayed and imprisoned, David hunted and hiding, Job stripped of all he loved, Peter weeping after denying Christ. Yet in each case, God's work did not stop at the point of collapse. He restored, not by returning things exactly to how they were, but by reshaping lives into something stronger, something more deeply rooted in Him. Restoration with God is not about erasing pain, but redeeming it. He takes what was meant for evil and turns it for good. He takes what the world deems useless, failures, losses, regrets, and brings forth new purpose. This is not merely comfort, it is transformation. The same Peter who denied Jesus became the rock upon which the church was built. The same Paul who persecuted believers became the one who penned the words of hope that still guide us today. These stories are not distant relics of faith. They are blueprints for our own lives. We may look at our broken pieces and see ruin. God sees material for renewal. He is the potter who reshapes what was marred into something glorious. In his hands, no crack is wasted. Every wound becomes a place for his grace to shine through. That is the mystery of divine restoration. It does not ignore our past, it redeems it. Our scars do not disqualify us, they often qualify us for a deeper calling. The restoration God brings is holistic. It touches our identity, our relationships, our sense of purpose. It reorients our lives around what is eternal rather than what is temporary. While the world may offer quick fixes, God offers a slow, faithful healing that reaches the soul. Sometimes that restoration happens over months. Sometimes it unfolds quietly over years. But it always moves forward with intention. The story does not end in the valley. The shepherd leads his sheep through it. He prepares a table on the other side. He anoints the head with oil. He fills the cup again. And even when everything in us doubts it, the truth remains. God never leaves his work unfinished. He restores the years the locusts have eaten. He makes all things new. He is the God who brings beauty from ashes, not once, but again and again. So then, what is God really doing when life breaks you? He is not looking away. He is not silent out of neglect. He is not absent in your sorrow. He is present in ways deeper than we often recognize, working in the silence, refining in the fire, revealing purpose in pain, and writing redemption into every shattered moment of your story. The cross reminds us that God does not stand apart from suffering, but enters into it with us, and the resurrection assures us that suffering is never the end. Your brokenness is not a disqualification. It is the very canvas upon which God begins his most meaningful work. He takes the pieces we cannot hold and shapes them into a testimony we could never write on our own. Though it may not feel like it now, you are not being buried, you are being planted. What seems like the end may be the beginning of something greater than you can see. When life breaks you, God is not undoing you, he is remaking you. And the hands that allow the breaking are the same hands that will bring the healing. Scars may remain, but so will grace. And grace is always stronger.